border force laws, are they too strong? A recent traveller found out the hard way. Welcome to Shiny Side Out, Nathan. Please tell us what happened to you.
Well, it was an uneventful stop on customs normally. So I got singled out, about to go through the get out of the airport channel, and there was about 6 of the customs people just stood there in a crowd, kind of almost like just starting the day. And one was just like, "Come with me." It did appear random. It didn't appear like it was premeditated. So we got to the inspection bay. And they did the usual small talk questions, where have you been, what have you been doing? They opened the bag, usual search, etc. Where it started getting a bit bizarre for me was they was like, "Okay, well, you've got a phone." Yeah. And they're like, "Well, you've got a laptop?" "Yep, got a MacBook Pro." Like, "Okay, well, we're going to need both devices." I'm like, "Well, why is that?" "Well, we just want to check both devices for suspicious files." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I value my privacy. So what will you be checking suspicious files for? What's the definition of suspicious?" And it's at that point where they're like, "Well, that's all covered under legislation, the Australian Border Force Act." And I'm like, "Right, well, I don't know what that is. So what defines suspicious?" There's a lot of business files on there from my clients. So, and they're like, "Well, that again, it's all covered in the legislation." I'm like, "Right, well, will that mean you're copying the files?" "Well, we can copy the files, yes." "All right, okay, well, what's the guarantee on the data retention policy if you don't find anything, but you have copied files? When will you get rid of them?" And they're like, "Right, well, that again is all covered under the legislation." I'm like, "Okay, and what if I say no?" And they're like, "Well, we can tell you under the legislation to unlock those devices basically under the threat of detention." I'm like, "Right, okay, well, I'm happy to unlock it. I don't care. I'll unlock it, but are you doing it in my presence?" "No, we'll take it away." And I'm like, "Right." So I have no recourse at this point to say no. Right. I also came off the flight. I'm a little bit dehydrated. Hearing my voice now, I am quite ill, actually, with a cold. It's man flu. But at the time, I came off the flight, and I'm not feeling 100%. Now, any other time at all, and I would have been like, "Right, well, we can sort this out with someone that knows the law inside out, and I'd like a lawyer, please, present." But this time, I just went, "Whatever, just take the devices." And that was that. So it was probably about another half hour. I wasn't with the devices. Old mate was. They were very polite all throughout. I can't fault them; they were doing their job. He was continuing to ask small talk questions, and that was that. Got me some water. Everything was all tickety boo. The guys came back with both the Mac and the Huawei Android phone. Halfway through, and the Huawei had actually locked itself, so they needed me to unlock it again. I'm like, no dramas. So I unlocked it. Now it's at that point that I'd seen a screen that I'd never seen before, and I now know that it was an Oreo, an Android operating system. It's an Easter egg that they put in the operating system, and everyone seems to be zeroing in on that, because I was like, "Well, I think they've rooted my phone based on that." I hadn't seen the screen at that point. I didn't know what it was. But when I asked them, and I'm like, "Have you rooted my phone? Have you installed software on there?" They're like, No, we've not done anything like that. No, we've not installed any software." And I'm like, "Can you unequivocally say that you've not installed any or rooted my device?" And again, they said, "Well, again, it's under the legislation, mate. So, but we haven't done anything like that." I'm like, "Huh, okay." Now, I think the viewers, I think the listeners need to know that even though that was a mistake on my part of being suspicious about this screen being some rootkit or something, the fact still remains. To get that Easter egg, to get that little floating octopus screen to pop up, right, someone has to actually sit there on the deepest phone settings screen, and they have to tap, I think it's about 10 times on the actual Android wording, right? You'd never know, right, how to do that unless you knew what you were doing. So that would suggest that they were looking at the actual phone at a very deep level as opposed to just copying files. So that's the first thing. It all seemed a bit like cloak and dagger, and it was all black box. If they have my stuff in front of them, right, in the inspection bay, no problem, right? They're looking through my luggage, they're asking me questions, and I can give answers there and then. If they find anything suspicious at that point, great, wheel me off and ask me deeper questions. They do the same thing with the bomb sniff test. Obviously, a lot of people have been through that. You get a bomb sniff test, they do it in front of you. But your deepest mobile devices, right, with all of your business stuff, your business process, intellectual property, you have no recourse, because if you say no to having them searched, you're now detained, and that's under the legislation. And again, they told me that it changed this week, right? So this is my problem, all right, is the biggest problem for me is that I am dual citizen. So I'm half English and I'm half Australian. I have passports for both. And because I do international travel quite frequently, and I also have like international clients' data on my laptop, and a lot of those clients are from Europe. Now, on May the 25th of this year, we had the General Data Protection come in with the GDPR, right? So that basically means that as a European citizen now at this point, I haven't given permission for anybody else, any of my staff even, to look at like files from my clients. All right. So the GDPR explicitly states that only people can move and change and edit the data of my clients that have been given permission by those clients.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have a situation where if I say no, as an Australian now, like coming into the country, then I'm falling foul of an Australian law. Which law takes priority? Because now I have no idea which files they accessed, what files they copied, how many files they copied, if they even copied any files. But me as a business, I now have to like go and probably send, well, I have to assume that every single person's files have been looked at, which means that is a GDPR breach notice that I have to now give all of my clients, because I have no idea which have been looked at and which haven't. So I have to assume all of them have. That costs me time, it costs me money, and it could, and I put this like really strongly, it could cost me business. Because if I now like have to serve a GDPR breach notice, that trust between my client and me has been breached, right? Not by me, but an Australian's custom officer and an Australian law. Which takes priority? I don't know, and no one can answer that. But I can tell you that through the whole of this blowing up of the story, I've already had business owners report and comment saying, you know what, it's actually made twice. We don't really want to go to America. So now if this is happening in Australia, we don't really want to come to Australia now either. And the other thing is that a lot of them are going, right, well, I've had second thoughts of coming to Australia, but if I do come, I'll bring blank prices.
That Nathan, that raises a really good point, right? So did you have any idea up until like the changes this week, did you have any idea the powers of Australian Border Force?
No, I didn't. I've never experienced this, never. I mean, I know they can stop and search you, and I'm okay with that. But I had no idea about their ability to copy files, and I had no idea about like the inability for me to say no.
Mm. Now, to do with your laptop, you know that since I saw your post, I've been looking everywhere and found that they could possibly have taken an image of your laptop and phone, not just copied files, so they could refer to them later on as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have no idea if they can inject files into that image either. Oh, here's a dodgy file. Well, I've got no recourse. Like, well, I don't know that file. I mean, this is like tinfoil hat, like, you know, territory. Don't get me wrong.
You are so on the right. You're in the right station for that.
Oh, right. Well, this is the issue, right? It wasn't done in my presence. So therefore, like, if you're going to image my hard drive, this is the interesting part of that. They needed me to unlock the Android phone, but they didn't even need me to turn on the Mac.
No, that's right.
But the MacBook Pro itself is from 2012, I think it is. It's built like a tank, and so it's got a USB on there. So I can't see that they took the back off of my laptop. I can't see that they did that, which would suggest that if they are going to image the drive through USB means, it's a USB 2 drive. It's a 512 gigabyte SSD in there. It would take bloody ages to copy that. So I'm not sure. If they did take the back off, it doesn't look like it. If they took the back off, they could drive pretty easily and pretty quickly. But if they didn't, and it doesn't look like they did, I don't know that they could have imaged the drive in this short time, 512 gigs, because it only took about an hour in total, and half an hour of just general sort of like. So I don't think they could have imaged the drive, is what I'm saying. But certainly, they didn't need me to even turn the device on the MacBook, so that would what they do. Obviously, get into do whatever they want.
So think about this: if you had a connecting flight, you would have missed it, right? If it was within that time, the 90 minutes or whatever, right?
Look, I don't think the guys would have let that happen, right? As long as I was cooperating, I'll be honest. But I feel as if I said no, I don't allow you, or not. I don't want to give you permission to look at files. I think at that point, absolutely, like 110%, I would have missed a flight. It would have turned in from like a nice, polite stop and search, all right, informal stop and search. It would have turned from that, and I think it would have turned a little bit more sinister and a little bit more serious. So I don't think I would have missed the flight under the normal pretenses. But if I'd said no, I absolutely would have. Yes.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Now, I've been looking at some other things to do with this, and it's crazy. So in Australia, the Australian Border Force has recently been given permission to, and without a warrant, search anyone's mobile phones and laptops for any evidence. And if you fail to unlock them, they can confiscate them, and that's permanently confiscate them and not return them. Now, this action can take place on airport grounds, the car park, in the terminal as a visitor, or coming through customs as Nathan's experienced, right? These laws seem to have snuck up on us pretty quickly. I mean, who knew? You see, until last week, and until today, to be honest, I didn't even know that they existed. Until today, I thought it was that searches required a search warrant from a judge. And I didn't know that it was at the airport. I knew that it was during a traffic stop.
So
well, here's the thing as well.
To listen to ABC News Radio.
So with the powers that they have at the moment, a number of journalists have approached me in the last couple of days. Obviously, the story's got quite big, and approached me. They're basically saying that the legislation that the customs officials were citing and the update this week that's happened, they were saying that actually hasn't been ratified yet, right? It's been drafted into the legislation, but what they were saying hasn't actually been like full-blown released as part of the updated legislation. So the journalists were interested in that part of the experience that I had, because it seems that the customs, like based on what I was saying, it seems the customs might have been overarching on their roles and responsibilities. So I have no idea, all right? So I don't have any idea. I'm just telling you what the and the listeners what the journalist told me. But it has meant I honestly think that from this point forward, like I won't be traveling with like I travel quite frequently between Australia and Thailand. I never take checked in luggage. So that would have set off alarm bells, I guess, although it never has. I usually spend, say, 6 weeks in Australia and 6 weeks in Thailand, right, in Phuket, actually. And I see coders and I have downtime, right? It's a very stressful position that I have. So I mash up my time between the two countries. I've never experienced this, and I am a frequent traveller. But from this point forward, I think all I'll do is basically just have like a blank laptop, or just leave the laptop in Thailand, have an Australian laptop and a Thai laptop, right, that are basically imaged, but just move between the borders with just a blank phone, like probably just some shell off-the-shelf flip phone, because it's just, I feel like it's really overarching now on this whole surveillance side of things. It really is. And there's no joined up thinking between the laws of the two different Commonwealth countries. Obviously, the GDPR being from Europe, right? Obviously, Britain is part of that. And obviously, the security concern of Australia, which law trumps which. And, it's my arse essentially that's swinging in the wind, or any business owner's arse that's swinging in the wind. If we're giving like willy-nilly access to our clients' files, when we've told GDPR restrictions will see us at 4% of our global turnover potentially for a breach. That's our problem now. That's not the customs fault. That's our actual problem now. Who are we to believe? Like, who are we supposed to follow the law of? We're trying to do the right thing, and yet we get penalised. It's not fair. It's not just, and it's very confusing, I think, for everybody.
I completely agree. I would have expected this kind of thing from the US, definitely, right? But maybe from Britain as well, from someone entering Britain, but because of the terrorist events that already occurred there, but not here. I just don't see that. But
it's all part of Five Eye, So
yeah, that's right. But I'll tell you something really weird about in America. The border forces have taken 30,000 devices so far in the last year to search mobile phones and laptops, right? But these actions have alerted civil liberties proponents and has now been taken to the federal court to contend the law that was passed to allow them to do this. Because, well, to pass admission to the federal court, it was determined that the customs border is not a constitution-free zone, and the people who have been searched were lawful citizens who committed no crimes. So in America, they're sort of lucky. But because here, we don't have a constitution. We don't have civil liberties, and it's decided with no correspondence.
Well, that's exactly right. And the thing with Australia is it's traditionally we're very apathetic when it comes. I myself am part of that, right? We're very apathetic when it comes to like politics. But this episode has actually mobilised me into looking now at political parties and political activism to see like if there's any change that could be effected in any small significant way. Like I don't subscribe to like the ability for anyone to see any files at any time, and I don't subscribe to the argument that if you have nothing to hide, what are you worried about? Well, if that's the case, then I'm sure you'll be quite happy to let me see your entire medical history, for example. People by and large are quite apathetic. I think people by and large are quite they're quite happy to just kind of like roll on. Australia doesn't really care. Like I'll be honest. I mean, this story has blown up, and really the only thing that's happened from it is a few journalists have got in touch with me, a couple of radio like appearances like this, but a few thousand likes and comments. But nothing's going to change from this unless people actually do start to question and really start to push back on this, and that's just not going to happen. I mean, we are now in a full-blown police state, and that's not hyperbole. Like China's looking at little old Australia as a test case. I mean, they haven't even implemented a lot of the stuff. We have so draconian laws that have just like wafted in, and now, and this is fact, and this is part of the legislation, it now means that friends of mine that run ISPs here in Australia, that now means that they have to now give, at a moment's notice, all of the key passwords and the actual data that's flowing right down there and up on each specific client when requested.
And that can include VPN traffic, right?
That now, and that's what the change is this last week. That now can include VPN traffic. But here's the thing, all right, it's not a back door. No, it's not a back door. No, because it's all like coming through the front door. The ISP is like now allowing it, okay? But this is under duress of, I think it's 5 years, threat of 5 years in prison, if they actually tell anybody of like what is actually happening at their ISP level in their business. They're compelled to install software from the different agencies, all right, on their servers. They're compelled to do that. All right. This is not, again, tinfoil hat. This is actual fact. All right. And there's actually a 3-tier process on this. Like step one, all right, tier one is when you get like a nice informal phone call from the agencies. Step two is there's more of a demand, or a firm demand to do this. And then step three is they actually now legally compel you to do that. You have no option as an Australian business to say no. And this actually affects any app provider in Australia. It affects any hardware provider in Australia, and that includes Apple, Huawei, Samsung, any mobile phone provider you can think of, as long as they sell hardware or sell apps or sell communication methods inside Australia and to Australians, they fall under this remit. So you now have companies having to spy on behalf of the Australian government, and you have them not being able to tell anybody what's going on under threat of perjury, right? Of going down for like 5 years essentially for alerting anyone to the fact.
Wow.
Like, and that's now part of that is part of the legislation. And I'm having people like all over the world now pinging me saying like, wow, you know, China can only sit there and salivate at this, and it's true. Like,
you know, the fact that they've shut down and selectively chosen to shut down people on social media. You know, the big case just recently, AJ is the initials of the person. I don't want our stuff to get too many hits. That's a worry. That's a real worry. And I know that they're doing that inside those platforms as well. And, you know, 1984, while it seems to some people to have snuck up on them real quick, we're deep in it now. There's no getting out of this. And George Orwell would be spinning in his grave knowing that we did this voluntarily.
George knew. He knew. So to be clear, sorry to interrupt, but the thing is this: you're quite right. Apathy is what has driven this for the most part, because nobody's interested in politics in Australia. I saw it coming. Nobody was interested because, for example, let me ask you: if
it didn't happen to you,
would you still be as active as you are? I mean,
I would. I don't subscribe to this whole security theatre in any way, shape, or form. And if someone is being treated unfairly, then absolutely I would step in. I think I'm in quite a minority there. I wouldn't care if they're wearing a baseball cap. Well, I think basically what's going to happen now as a result, everyone's going to start to have their devices checked out. I think it's going to happen more and more and more. And I think there'll be a critical mass at some point in the future where some prominent journalists or some prominent business people, people with like way more followers, millions more followers than me, will basically have something to say about that. Little old Nathan and his 11,000 shares or whatever on social media make a difference. But you can bet that as soon as the first business has this happened to them, you can see that being a huge story. So, you know, I have optimism for the future, all right, but I am pessimist, like in the short to medium term.
I think the ship has sailed completely. I know there's a delay, sorry guys, but the ship has sailed. I think we should be very vigilant. Before you know it, I mean, you don't know what you communicate. Let me give an example very quickly, just very quickly, which is sort of related. There was some criminal activity that a company I worked for had happened to itself. So when I say criminal, not quite lawful. The accounting team was involved. However, every person who was touched by the email trail that was attached to this criminal action, they had nothing to do with anything. But the auditors came in, they looked at everything, and everybody was let go, irrespective of whether or not they're involved. They're on the trail, on the email trail, and you're out. Now overlay that over your phone. I don't know what's on your phone. You might not know all the things that are on your phone or your other device. People can make up all kinds of stories. And in fact, if somebody takes a phone, like happened to you, you don't know. You said, did they put a file on it? I don't know. Did they put a lot of files on it? You don't know. But if they did put something there, like an 3, 4, 5 months time, and has got some really incriminating photos, documents, I don't know what, you have no defense. This is the problem here, right? I mean, this is a real world thing. 1984, that ship has sailed, but he was envisioning that's just yesterday's news. This is we're living in the era of the end of privacy, right? That's the real problem.
No, I think you're 100% correct on that. Like, you know, but like the pendulum's like swinging to the state of like no privacy. But I think, as I say, I think once you start getting some titans of business, I think once you start getting some human rights people, I think some prominent journalists, I think you're going to start to see a lot of people like kick up a fuss about this. And I think that finally the pendulum will start swinging backwards. But at the moment, it's not coming back anytime soon. But
you're right. Look, there's two examples in America that led this, just like those titans, right? So there was one, it was a NASA worker who refused when asked to hand over their device. That was a work-supplied phone, for crying out loud, right? But they were a NASA worker.
Yeah, but on that one, he actually was an American national. It was just that he had like brown skin, basically. He'd just come away from the solar car challenge. He was working on that. So when he came back in, like the TSA stopped and searched and detained him, etc., etc. Now, he did actually give the phone to them, right? Eventually, he cracked and he's like, fine, have the phone. But he has the luxury of taking the mobile device, right, untouched from when they gave it back to him. And he took it to the Jet Propulsion Lab, right? So I don't have that luxury, and I think most people won't have that luxury to take their phone to the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab to see if it's actually been changed or you know, etc. on there. But I can tell you this: it will be very interesting when the new phones come out that will be blockchain powered. So, like, how do you reconcile, like, you know, a blockchain private key, for example? If you have a mobile device that's based on blockchain and the information is in blockchain and it's hidden behind like a seed key that only I know, how would I be compelled to give that seed key? Like, how would I do that? My currency, right? Are you carrying any sort of like a bearer bonds or monetary value over $10,000? Well, how do you answer that? Right, I'm using crypto. All right, why should I tell you about like my crypto if in fact I've got any? That will all be held on this new wave of mobile phones that are coming out that are based on crypto. I think LG and I think Samsung are actually getting deep into it as well. So that will be interesting too. So your phone will have nothing on it. Your phone will basically be storing all the data in a blockchain and then syncing that data like as and when. So I think that will be an interesting one for security forces. Fine. I've got traveller's checks to the you know, $10,000 or $11,000 on me, no more. I might be carrying $100,000 worth of like cryptocurrency. I'm certainly not you what my seed keys are.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And look, by the way, the NASA worker did unlock the phone for them, but the other worker, the Texas businessman, he refused to unlock his phone. But that resulted in the border forces confiscating the smartphone, and they didn't return it for 11 months.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, and I think that's exactly the same thing. You know, like what's going to happen? People are going to be like, right, well, if I've got the ability for people to like seize my phone, if I say no, then all I'm going to take is like the most cheapest crappy phone, right, burner phone that I can find. And if you do seize it, don't worry about it. You know,
take my old Nokia.
Exactly. So it kind of like, you know, again, if enough people do that, and I highly suspect they won't, but let's say they do, well, that completely undermines the reason for doing it in the first place, you know?
Absolutely. Look, Nathan, it's been fantastic having you on. Let's hope it stops here, but I fear it won't. I fear it's going to only get worse.
Sadly, I agree with you.
Thanks, Nathan. Take care. An amazing first-hand account of just how things are going.